Jurrell is the executive pastor at Emmanuel Church. And hi, everybody. Thanks for jumping on and checking in with us tonight. Hey, bro.
Hey, brother.
Jurrell's the executive pastor at Emmanuel, so I get the distinct privilege of working with this man every day, and I count him as one of my best friends, and nobody has taught me more about this. I'm probably going to be emotional through this whole thing. So normally I get on here on my own and talk, but my goal is to talk a lot less tonight and let Jurrell share. One of the things that we need to get better about listening to other people's experience and being educated. And this last week has been one of the most horrible, awful things that I've ever experienced in my life. But I have been reminded over and over again that this is every day for a lot of people. And so Jurrell and I we have not rehearsed this. I don't even know where the conversation's going to go. We're just going to have it and let you listen in. And I just want Jurrell to say thank you to you out of the gate. You have allowed me to ask really hard questions over the years. We have worked arm in arm for 5 years, but we've known each other for 10. And you've allowed me to ask a lot of stupid white guy questions. And you have been so patient with me and understanding. And so I guess I just want to start with, how are you? And how are your wife and kids doing in this, as the news came of George Floyd's murder and everything since then?
Yeah, well, first, same thing. I thank you for your friendship. I thank you for, giving me the opportunity to do what I do at Emmanuel, and handpicking me. I remember the day you walked into the office and said, I wanted you to be on staff, and I was just really beyond excited about, the opportunity. I never thought we'd be on the roller coaster that we're on, but it's a great ride. And so I really want to just thank you and show my appreciation for that. And also for doing this, willing to have a talk, have a conversation, because I think that's part of the challenge, and why we find ourselves, I think, where we are right now is because we're not having conversations and we're not talking to each other. And, there's assumptions on every side. And with those assumptions, people make decisions and do things that don't make sense. So again, I just appreciate the fact that we're doing this. And, like you, my hope is not to be emotional. And, all I can think of, and I mentioned to you earlier, is that if I do become emotional, I may become like the next Michael Jordan meme, or the crying Jordan. And like, please don't let me be crying Jordan. But, it's been an interesting week, to say the least. We haven't sat down really as a family yet and processed it and talked about it. We were kind of talked around it, and oh, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? I can definitely see my older two sons processing it, mainly through social media, and so I've given them a little space to do that, because the fear is often, if you say something, it becomes politicized, and then the whole message gets lost in the process. And so I don't want that to be the case. But at the same time, they have to learn what it means to be Black in America, and the responsibilities that come with that. So That's been interesting to see them posting and sharing and engaging with their friends around that. I think it's been hardest for Jurrell because Sherelle's my wife. She doesn't watch the news and she's not on social media, and so but what she has accounts, but she doesn't really access them. And I thought that maybe she had been getting the alerts from my boys' post to kind of know what's going on. And I think it was yesterday that I guess I was behaving weirdly yesterday afternoon because normally my oldest son, he takes the dog out for a walk, and I said, so I don't want you to walk the dog today, so just take him out in the backyard and play with him to get his exercise in. And then also my middle son was going to go scooter riding with with our foster daughter, and I said the same thing. I said, you can go out with the scooter, but just stay on our block, don't go any further than that. And my wife is like, this is weird. And then the other thing that we normally do is we usually get like fast food to take out on Sunday. So I said, well, if we're going to get something, we need to get it sooner because everything may be closed later. And that's when I got the sense that she was completely oblivious. So she had this crash course yesterday, in the week. And I, told her about the 4 stories, that happened last weekend and showed her the videos and, the coverage of the riots and the protests and what have you. And she was completely gassed. Like she had nothing left the rest of the night. Um, just heartbroken, speechless, and what have you. So, it's been a rough for her. She's now taken to social media as well, and has made a few posts and what have you. And as always, again, I always, especially in the church setting and in the pastoral role, I try my best to not be political because I know politics can be divisive. And, that's not what I want. I want people to come to know Jesus. And sometimes politics can get in the way of that. So, oftentimes she'll say, hey, I want to post this. What do you think? Because she wants to make sure that we're not creating divisiveness. And so this morning she said, hey, I posted this. I'm going to post this. Do you want to read it first? And I just said, no, just post it. Because I think it was important for her to be able to just express how she felt. And how she felt is how she felt. And if someone had a problem with that, they were just going to have a problem with that. Because I think the other thing is, again, knowing my heart, knowing her heart, the posting and the communicating and the talking, it's not about trying to be divisive. It's about trying to actually bring people together. And we can't do that if none of us talking and sharing and what have you. So, that's been a little rough the last, day and a half. And then my youngest son, he's in 7th grade, so he's not on social media, doesn't watch the news, but he's kind of getting the sense that something's going on. And so he started asking a lot of questions today. And I told him that we talked this evening. So I'll probably talk to him after we finish, with this video here, and just kind of help him understand it in the most appropriate way. What's happening. So that's kind of where we've been. For me, last weekend was kind of like I've had enough. Of not saying anything. Trying to straddle the fence of okay, well, I want to say something, but I know it can get politicized, and I don't want to do that. But I started reading a bunch of quotes by Martin Luther King about silence, and realizing that what's worse than sometimes the atrocities or the silence that comes after that. And I felt like, I'm not going to be silent anymore. Now I'll still be appropriate, and I'll still try not to be dismissive, to split people up. But what I wasn't going to do is continue to be silent. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I was going to make people uncomfortable in that, but I was okay with that. Mm-hmm. Because, and I'll talk about that later on. There's a certain level of uncomfortableness that you have automatically as a Black person, I mean, again, I'll elaborate about that later. But I felt like I'm not going to continue just to be uncomfortable and not express myself because I'm concerned about what other people might think. And if they don't know me and they think that something other than what my true heart is, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned so much from you, you said it early on, what it means to be Black in America. And I think it's so for people like me to assume we know, and it runs so much deeper than what any of us can imagine for you. And you know, you've shared with me some of the things that go through your head and some of the things that are kind of always going for you. And you know, to whatever degree you're comfortable, I would just love it if you'd share a little bit about that. Like,
yeah,
you know, because everybody thinks we've got such misunderstandings about white privilege and all that kind of stuff. And do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So let me start by, I guess, sharing a little history so that you can get to why I think the way I think about certain things, or why I take certain precautions about things. And it's also to help, people, that white people, non-Black people, however you want to say it, help them to understand why this may be confusing or why this may be shocking.
Right.
And part of that is because of the understanding behind, racism. And a lot of people start to think, well, things are not like they used to be, so maybe racism isn't what it used to be.
Right.
And the thing to understand about racism is it's an ideology, it's a thought, it's a way of thinking. And even when everything may look good on the outside, that doesn't mean the thinking or the ideology is going away. So one might believe, well, if you take me, for example, I live in a upper middle class white neighborhood. My kids go to great schools. I'm the second in charge at our church. That's a predominantly white church with, all white staff except for myself. And, graduated from college. My wife is a nurse at a predominantly white middle school, elementary school. And so it would suggest that, well, everything must be okay because that's what my lifestyle suggests. But the thing to understand is it's more than just that. It's about all the things that are still below the surface that haven't been dealt with. And that's where the challenge comes in, and that's what makes me think about the things the way I think about things. So, with that, I'll tell you a couple of stories, 3 stories, about experiences my sons have had.
Yeah.
And I'll start with my youngest son. My middle son, and his first experience with racism was, as I want to say he was maybe first grade, maybe second grade at the oldest, and it was at our church, and it was through our upper basketball program. And one, for clarity, our church is great, and our upper basketball program is fantastic. But the reality is that there are people who do things and say things, and they're everywhere in all walks of life. And so I was the coach of the team, and we were at practice, and we were splitting the kids up for a scrimmage, and the kids were picking, who was on their team. And one of the kids who was picking the teams told Jurrell he couldn't be, my middle son, that he couldn't be on his team because of his skin color. And I can't remember because it's been so long. I want to say because you're darker than us, or something to that effect. And as a first grader, it didn't register with him. I didn't hear it, but I guess maybe later that week, a week later, for whatever reason, it came back up. Maybe when we got back to the next practice, and he asked me about it, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, when they were doing the teams, the kids said that I couldn't be on his team because I was darker than him. And, you know, that was his first rude awakening into, just because I'm a little different, you're going to treat me differently. But as a first grader, it didn't mean a whole lot to him at the time, other than it just seemed more of an oddity to him. And then a few years later, my same son, we were at a birthday party, and friends that attend Emmanuel, and they're great people, and they had no role in what happened. So I do want to say that. But when we were invited to the son's birthday party, and we're all sitting out in the backyard in lawn chairs, and we're enjoying ourselves, and we're having a good time, and the kids are playing, and it's at some point the kids decide to play football. And so when all the kids decide to play football, they kind of go off over to the field that's adjacent to the house, and all of, you know, a few minutes later, Jurrell comes back crying. And I can't understand why he's crying, because he's crying like he's been physically hurt. I mean, big, humongous crocodile tears. And I'm like, what's wrong? And I can barely understand him. And he says, they said I can't play football because I'm black. And I don't know, I don't know what that has to do with anything. So here's a fourth grader,
A child.
a child, being told by another child that he can't play a game with the rest of the kids because he's black. And he can't fathom why. And our friends, the kids' parents were just as distraught, and they couldn't understand it either. But as they kind of pressed their son to kind of figure out where did he get this from, they realized that this was the influence of his grandfather. And you know, again, that this is life. This is life being black in America. And then the most recent time was last football season. My oldest son was invited to a football game with his friends, and the friends that went together, he was the only black kid. All the rest of the friends were white. And so Jurrell, he goes to Warren. For those of you who are familiar with Warren High School, great high school. And then he had three other friends who were guys. They were all three guys were white, and they went to Zion High School, which is a predominantly black school. And then there was another friend of theirs who went to a white young lady who went to a private school in Wisconsin. And they were invited to a football game by a friend who attended this school. And I won't say the school because I'm not trying to create confusion. But she invited them to the football game. And they all went. And the friend who had invited all the kids wanted to sit in the student section. So she, invites them. They sit in the student section, and for the most part, it seems like everything is going fine. But then there's some kids who start picking on Jurrell, and just giving him a hard time. And he's the only one that's being given a hard time, and they're asking him, where are you from, and why are you here, and why aren't you cheering for our school, and all that kind of stuff. And he's just trying to be calm and be, relaxed and chill about it. And, in talking with him, he can sense that it's just me that they're picking on. They're not picking on anybody else. And by the time they got to halftime, it had become so bad that he decided to just go down to the concession stand because he didn't want to be up there anymore. And so he left and went down, and he told his friend who was with him, I can't deal with this, I'm going. And his friend kind of acknowledged because he heard it, but they were trying to ignore them. And, the thing is, and this is the part that's really important, as I tell this part of the story, what you have to understand is a lot of people are thinking, well, was this really them teasing them because he was black? And you might think that, But what you have to understand is that, as you grow up as a black person, you start to get a sense of when people are maybe just being a jerk because they're a jerk to everybody versus when it's kind of targeted to you. And if there was any doubt up to that point when he had left, that there was racial undertones, it was very clear after he left. Because when he went down to the concession stand, they started picking on his other friend, who is white. And they asked him, where was he from? And he said, I go to Zion High School. And they told him that he's not a real white person. And he needs to go back to Zion with the gorillas. These are kids. Where are they getting this from? So, and this is normal. This is what life is like. And so you know that though I have the privileges or the opportunity to have a nice house and a nice car and a nice job and have my kids go to nice schools, I know that there's this underlying racism that exists, that people make decisions based on and do bad and evil things based on. So, when I say things, when I have a conversation, I say to people, well, because my neighborhood, I before my kids were allowed to kind of walk the neighborhood, I would actually talk to them and say, hey, when you're walking through the neighborhood, make sure you don't walk on anyone's lawn or do anything that might be suspect, because I don't know who these people are. I don't know if you're good or if you're bad. And, there's a shortcut to the park in our neighborhood, and it's a field between an empty lot, that is, between two houses where they didn't build a house. And I really get concerned whenever they talk about walking through that lot to get to the park, because I don't want anyone to think that they're walking through the back of someone's yard or anything like that. And so, anyway, the point being that this is normal. This is what it means to be, black in America, to second guess yourself, because sometimes people are just jerks. And sometimes people are just being racist. And I have to say, okay, well, was it because of me or was it because of them? And, I have to think about where I go and when I go there and how I look when I go there. I remember talking with one of our friends, on staff, and we had an event at church, and we wanted to use the parking lot of another church that's a block or so down the street. And he says, well, let's just go down there. Well, he said it to me. He said, well, why don't you just go down there and ask them, can we use their parking lot? And this is one of those days when I had on some ratty jeans and an old T-shirt. And I was like, no, maybe I'll go ask tomorrow. But I didn't tell him why. Because, again, I don't want to sound like a crazy person saying, well, I don't want to go because I don't want them to think that I'm some, derelict black person and walking in and saying, hey, can I use your parking lot? And so, but this is the way I have to process stuff. And I have to process it because these things happen. They're real, and they happen every day, and they happen all the time. And so anyway, I think that's the key to understand. One of the things that's really important is to understand that this is a reality. And I would be safe. I feel very safe in saying that there's not a black person in America who has not felt this, who haven't had the experiences that I've had or that my boys have had. And if they haven't had it, they're going to have it. There's no exemption from this experience.
Yeah, so easy for us to think that only happens in certain parts of our country, right? Or like in the city. And this is happening in our neighborhood, right? Like in our town. And I don't mean to cut you off, but I just, as a dad, man, I know what happens inside of me when my kids get teased and made fun of, and I'm so sorry. I really am. I'm sorry to you and Jurrell and to your boys. And like you said, I'm sorry for the times I've been silent. And it just shouldn't be that way for your kids or for you. Like, you shouldn't ever have to think twice about going anywhere. Like that's what I'm saying. Like I can't even imagine that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I that's, it's just so important that this conversation is not the last conversation, and that, you know, that everyone starts having conversations. And I get what I guess what I really mean is white people need to start having the conversation.
Yeah.
And they need to listen, and they need to try to understand, though they won't completely. But don't assume that everything's okay just because everything looks okay, because it's not okay. And it's just a normal part of life, that we go through and that we experience. And yeah, that I think is the biggest thing. You got to take the initiative. It doesn't work unless you take the initiative. And the reality is, I know what I'm asking. I'm asking you for you to be uncomfortable, and I'm asking you to step out of your comfort zone, and I'm asking you to be proactive. And I get that. That's a lot, but there's nothing else that's going to change it outside of being proactive and doing something. I mean, it goes right to your sermon, you know, of praying about it or doing something, and you got to do something. And the key here, I think, is to do something is the hardest part of doing something. You know, it's easy when someone's not allowed to go to a school, or, you know, not allowed to live in a neighborhood, and say, well, that's wrong. But the hard work is saying, I'm going to proactively create relationships with people of color, because it requires work, you know. And I get that. You know, one of my biggest difficulties when I first moved here was that I didn't feel like making new friends because it's work.
Mm.
You know, before moving here, I'd had my set of friends that I grew up with and grew with, and the idea of having to make new friends, it seems like a lot of work. So I get that, but there's no way around that. If you're not going to do the work, there's not going to be a change. There can't be.
Right.
So, another thing is, you know, we have protests and riots going on, and one of the things that I need people to understand, I hope that they understand, is that not all protesters are rioters,
Right.
and not everyone rioting is actually a protester.
Mm.
You know, and what's unfortunate, and it's the way the devil works, is he confuses the whole story and the narrative, because there are people who are protesting, and that's all they're doing is they're protesting. But then there are also people who are rioting, and that's unacceptable. It's not the way to do things. I think protesting is the way to do things, but not destroying stuff. That's not the way to go. But, you know, the thing that I think I want you to help you understand, even for those who are protesters slash rioters, and I think Martin Luther King said it best. He said that riots are the language of the unheard.
Mm-hmm.
And what feels like for a lot of people, something that happened all of a sudden didn't happen all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
Because this has been going on. People have been talking about it and saying, hey, you know, we're going to protest peacefully. We're going to protest quietly. We're going to protest this way. We're going to protest that way. And in every way that they protest is like, well, no, you shouldn't protest like that. And so when you have the experiences of knowing that your children get treated the way my kids have been treated, and that you have to think about what you say and how you say it and where you say it and where you go and how you look when you go someplace, and then you see all the other injustices, at some point you reach a boiling point.
Right.
And again, I am in no way excusing the rioting, but I am saying I understand the source of it, because this didn't happen out of the blue. It didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't an all of a sudden thing.
Mm-hmm.
There were lots of ways that people have protested over the last few years, none of which have been acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And no one was listening. And unfortunately, of where we are right now, as opposed to having had this conversation years ago. And I get that it's a shock, but this in no way shocks me, because I knew that this day was coming. I knew that the day was going to come when someone was going to die, and it was going to be perfectly clear that this person died, that they should not have died. And I knew when that day came, this is what it would look like, because this people again have been saying repeatedly, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And at some point, your voice escalates, and then you get mad, and then you get angry,
right?
Because you're not listening to me,
right?
And so the only way you're going to listen to me is if I get belligerent, essentially.
Right.
So again, I don't excuse it. I think it's the wrong way. I believe that Martin Luther King showed us the right way to do it, but I do understand why we have it, because people are not being heard.
Yeah. You've seen that quote from Will Smith, right? Racism isn't new, it's just being recorded. I don't got that totally right, but
right. Yeah. And that's it. The difference maker is that we get to see it now. And I think about the other story from the weekend, and not everyone even heard about it. I remember sharing with you, and you were surprised. We've all heard of the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis, and I think most of you've heard about Amy Cooper and what she did. And I think the thing to understand about Amy Cooper is, and I heard someone say this, is what she did was she used her whiteness to take advantage of our blackness. Because before she made the phone call, her statement was, I'm going to tell them an African-American man is attacking me. And he wasn't. And what's scary about that is that had he not recorded that, had he not been able to show that, in fact, he had done nothing and police had arrived on the scene, I'm afraid of what might have been the case. Because if you listen to her call without looking, if I'm on the other end of the phone, I would believe that she's being bloody murdered because of the fact of how she sounds. And the question would be, well, no one would sound like that unless something must be really wrong. And so you'd be hard pressed to believe that Christian Cooper had not in fact done or something.
Yeah, because, like, leveraged police brutality.
Exactly.
Knew full well how that was going to play out.
Yeah, and I think that's the part. I think that's the other part that's important, is that she knew exactly what she was doing when she did it. She knew how to sound on the phone. She knew that he was going to be afraid if they showed up or tried to use what might be one of his weaknesses against him. And here's the reality: most of us know that, but and we pretend like we don't, but we do know that. And if anything, Amy Cooper's video shows that. But then the other thing to keep in mind are the other stories. Christopher Keys, this past week, he told his family that he was kidnapped, or rather carjacked and kidnapped at a CVS by two black men. And when police further investigated, what they determined was that was a complete lie. And that the only reason that he had told his family that story is because he'd been missing, and he'd actually been at some, off the way hotel soliciting male prostitutes. And since he couldn't come up with a story to explain it, that was his story. That's again, people. That tells me you understand the best way to get out of something is to blame someone who everyone thinks they'll probably be that person. They probably did it anyway. And the other one is Patricia Ripley. Last weekend, or a little bit more than a week ago, Patricia Ripley told the police that she was attacked by two black men who took her son and drowned him in the canal. And what they found out was, in fact, she drowned her son in the canal. She had an autistic son, and I guess she couldn't take care of him anymore, and so she literally pushed him in the canal. And there's a security footage of her literally taking her son, walk along the canal, and shove him into the canal. But and as sad as that is, her alibi or her story was that two black men did it. This is why, again, I'm always fearful and concerned about my boys being out in public, because I don't know when there's going to be someone pointing the finger at them for something that they did not do, and no one's saying, "Oh, let's give them the benefit of the doubt for a change." So,
yeah, and it's, I was thinking when you told me those two stories, because I hadn't heard about them, and it's like a case in point of, as a white guy, it's easy for me to not catch all that stuff, but for you, that's all those stories are constantly part of the narrative for you. And I think that that's what so many people don't understand. It's like you said, George Floyd, this isn't all because of him. It's because of so much else. And it's like, finally, people are listening to it.
right. And that's the sad part, is that it took that for people to start listening. And for everyone that's not recorded, there's something that, for everyone that is recorded, there's something that's not recorded. One recorded the scenario that happened with my son at the high school. But I know his story isn't the only story.
Right.
And there are hundreds of stories out there that just don't make the news. But then you don't get the benefit of the doubt because of the fact that we don't have it recorded. At the end of the day, what people need to understand is we're not making this stuff up.
Right.
This is not figments of our imagination that we have these thoughts and these fears and these concerns. They're real, and they're based on real experiences and real life, things. So again, I think the biggest thing is to understand that this is reality. It's my reality. It's Black America's reality. And it has to be unacceptable, but it can't just be us, because most people, when we say something is wrong, the third is, well, that's just them complaining, which is why it's important that you say something too, because at the end of the day, the only thing that makes it better is changing the hearts and minds of people.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way you change the hearts and minds of people is to keep on talking about something, and eventually it clicks for them, and they start to think, okay, maybe I am missing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said to me the other day, it's good. We need white people that like to be advocates. And I think that, I heard that distinction just the other night. It's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist.
Right.
And it's going to require white people to advocate for the African American community and to do what you said, get outside of our comfort zone, be willing to, honestly, to lose some friends.
Yes.
You know what I mean? To lose some friends, maybe tick off some family members, and for me, it's tick off some people that go to my church, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, I think that's so important for people to understand. And what you had shared something with me the other day, and I don't expect you to be able to recite all 8 of them, but
Mm-hmm.
just some things that you had shared it from a friend of yours, I think. 8 I wish my white people or white friends would do.
Yeah. So actually, I don't know him. I just saw the social media post. But there's a young man by the name of Theo Davis, and he's a youth pastor in Kansas City. And he wrote a post a few days ago, and the name of his post was 8 things I wish my white friends knew about racism or did about racism. And he just kind of goes through those things. I actually wrote them down because I did want to bring them up. And the first thing he said was lament.
Mm.
Just cry with them.
Mm.
let them know that you feel their pain.
Mm.
You know, don't dismiss it. Know that it's real pain, and just kind of be in it with them. And his second thing was just that, which is the biggest one, is don't be dismissive. Don't blow it off when they share something with you. Don't think, well, there's an explanation for why that happened. One of the things he said was it's hard enough to, for a black person to say, hey, this is what I'm feeling, to a white person. But then to be dismissed by it, that doesn't help, and it closes off the conversation.
Mm.
And the third thing he said was to educate yourself and understand historically what's happening and why it's happening. And understand the underlying tones, because I think it's reasonable for someone who doesn't know any better to say, well, racism can't be that bad, because I can live in a nice white neighborhood and go and drive nice cars and go to nice schools and nice churches. So can it be that bad? And I think the first thing to understand is that racism is more than just not being able to do those things.
Right.
And then the other thing was to seek out, Black authors and podcasters who talk about their experiences, and understand, where we're coming from when we express the things that we express. I think another important one, and this is both number 5 and number 6, and that's to talk to your children.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the three instances that bother me the most, not talking about my experiences, are the ones that my boys have experienced, and they've experienced it at the hands of other children.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so important that you talk with your children, and that when you talk with them, you explain to them in the age appropriate way what's happening, because that's what I have to do. And since my boys were young, and now and probably until they're out of the house and beyond, I'll be trying to help them understand how to successfully and safely live as a Black man in America.
Mm.
When they were young, I was really hard on them from a discipline perspective of trying to make sure that they stay on the straight and narrow, because I know that just even a slight deviation from the straight could put them in situations that are much worse than any other kids had found themselves in similar situations. So you have to talk to your kids, and again, it's not a one-time conversation. One of the things I like about what he said in his post was, as a youth pastor, they talk to the kids about sex at some point, but they don't talk about it one time. It's a conversation to help them understand what that means and what it should look like and what have you. And it's no different than talking about race in America.
And it goes right back to some of what we already said, right? Like, it's not enough for me to sit down and tell my boys, saying this is wrong and thinking this way is wrong. It's teaching them, when those things get said by others, you stand up to it, right?
Exactly.
Like, you advocate and stand with. Like, don't be silent when those things come up.
Exactly. And that's it more than anything else. And I've tried to teach my boys that. My youngest son, I didn't share his experience, but he has an experience also as a 6th grader, where he has a friend group at his middle school, and one of the kids got upset with a young lady in their group who's Black, and he ended his statement with, well, I'm not talking to you because you can't trust Black people. And Jurrell, that wasn't acceptable. And so they essentially banned him from their circle, and he told the teacher. But that's what it has to be. It has to be that this is unacceptable. And kids have to understand that this is unacceptable and say stuff and do stuff about it. And so you have to teach your kids what that means and help them understand it. And then the other thing, that he said was to talk to your friends. Like, and white people, talk to your other white friends. And he said, you'll be surprised at how many of them would be willing to have the conversation about, hey, what do you think, or what are your thoughts, or what are your feelings, with the help of understanding and what have you. So that was one of them. His seventh one was support organizations. And there are lots of organizations you can support that are trying to make the Black experience of Black America better. And all of them are political. One of the ones that, I've recently fell in love with, probably more about because of a Facebook post, is My Father's Business.
Yeah.
My Father's Business is in Zion, and they do really great work with kids in the Black community. It's run by a police officer, a Zion police officer. Zach on our staff is a key member of that team. But that's what has to happen. You have to do something. You have to support the organization, whether you support it by volunteering or whether you support it with your finances. But that's one way. You want to kind of understand people and get to know them, then support them,
Yeah.
and you'll get a much better understanding.
Yeah. I think that's so. It's so interesting because I really took that to heart when you shared that with me, and to follow, on social media, it's so easy to get access to some of that stuff now, and to read and listen, and there's a lot of really helpful education out there to be had if people are willing to take that step and ask the hard questions and look at themselves in the mirror. I think that's part of what allows people to avoid it, is because it means they're going to have to change and they're going to have to think different, and nobody wants to do that.
Right. Yeah, again, it's going to take that work. You got to put a true effort. You have to make real effort in order to make real change. There's no way around that. The last thing that he said was, I think, probably the most final, which was number 8 on his list. And what he said was, don't demonize the perpetrators. So don't demonize Amy Cooper, and don't demonize the people that do these horrible things. That doesn't mean that they don't get the consequences of their actions. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be punished. But, and this is for Christians in particular, that's not who Jesus wants us to be. Now, obviously, if someone is not sorry and unrepentant, that's one thing. But for someone who's truly sorry, we need to find a way to forgive them. And we need to find a way to forgive them, because that's what Jesus did for us, in spite of all the things that we do and the things that we've done. And I know that that's one of the hardest things to do, is find forgiveness when you've been so wronged. But that is what we're called to do as Christians. And we have to find a way to do that, because that's what sets us apart from everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that as Christians, as a Christian, I think that I'm more responsible than anybody, and when you look at the things that we read in Scripture over and over again, that we quote, that we hang in our houses, that we get tattooed on our bodies, they speak to this. And we can't compartmentalize those things into the things that we're comfortable with, and I just think one of the main problems is that it's a lot of Christian people that are just quiet on this, and the church should not be letting anybody else take the lead.
Right. That's it. Another quote from Dr. King, which is one of my favorites, and it's just a paraphrase. But what he said was, he was talking about the Samaritan, the man on the road, and he said the priest passed by, and Levite passed by, and they probably thought to themselves, what's going to happen to me if I do something?
Mm-hmm.
And the Good Samaritan went by, and the question was different. What's going to happen to him if I don't do anything? And that's where we are. If you don't do anything because you're afraid of what's going to happen to you, then we're already lost.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that, as we've been talking to our boys about it, and I shared this with our staff today. My niece is African American, and that application and truth of that story that Jesus told, the question's not anymore what's going to happen to me if I say something. It's what's going to happen to my little niece who's brilliant and innocent and good, and or my brother-in-law or you or your boys or the boys at my father's business, right? Like, what's going to happen to them if somebody with, like, this is one of the things that I heard somebody on social media say, the people with privilege need to use it on behalf of those who don't.
Exactly.
Because as a Christian, I've started to go, that's why I have it, is to use it and to leverage it.
Mm-hmm.
I just,
mm-hmm. Yep.
It's I don't know, man. It's like, what do there are a lot of times, not just when it comes to race, where I look at you and go, what do we do? So anybody from Emmanuel that's watching, you need to know this is the guy. He's the real guy. I'm looking at you, man, and I'm just like, keep teaching us, keep teaching us. And you are such a role model in, man, I don't know how you temper your anger so well, bro, because I'm so angry, and you know what I mean? Like, I was on a call. I told you about this earlier today, but I'll share this with the others that are listening. I get to be a part of some circles with other pastors, and one of them is with some influential and large churches in the Midwest through Converge. And there were, on the call today, there were, I think 6 or 7 of us, and 2 of the guys were African American pastors of African American churches. And there was a moment where we had all kind of shared how confused and hurt and frustrated and all that we were. And I will never forget this moment. The one pastor said, this is every week. This is every week where we're trying to navigate things like this. And he goes, God has given you a glimpse. What are you going to do with it? And that shook me to my bones, man, of like, to think, I don't know.
Yeah. I think what you said right before that, I think is the key. And you said that you're so angry, and you asked, well, how is that I'm not angry? And I am white hot angry, but I have to temper that, because if I don't, then my message gets lost as an angry black man. So if I just go ranting and raving, then I'm just part of the noise. So I have to keep calm so that I can make sure that when I'm talking to people about these things, that they can hear me, and they're not looking at the outside of what's going on. But there's no such thing as an angry white guy. And what I mean by it is, so that's exactly what I want you to be angry. I
Mm.
want you to be so angry that you're fed up and you won't, you got to do something, and you won't tolerate it anymore. Because when you become angry and you stop tolerating it, people listen. They're
Mm.
going to listen a lot more to you than they're going to listen to me. So be angry, and be as angry as all get out, and unapologetically angry, because you can get away with it at a level that I can't, because it then becomes noise.
Mm.
So be angry. And again, the last thing that the youth pastor said, from his list of 8 things is, start with a couple of things,
Mm.
because this is overwhelming, and I get that. But start with something. Of the 8 things on the list, start with something. Start with 1 or 2, but don't not do any of them, or think about them, or as we said, don't pray about them. Just do them.
Yeah.
So that's it. It's be angry. It's be angry. Express your anger. Do the list.
Yeah. That's good, man. That's a bottom line you just dropped right there. Yeah. Part of what I'm convicted of too is stay angry and do something about it before the next George Floyd, right? I think that it's so easy. It's so easy for us to, especially white people, to go, well, we're going to let this one blow over and it'll get back to normal. And we can't do that crap anymore. We can't. Like, it's like you said, we've tried, and you've tried, and I don't know, I'm just so, I I don't want it to slip back into that, for me, for my family, for my friends, of, ride this out till everybody's temper's cool, and then we leave it again up to somebody else, and it doesn't get done.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's so important. And I think it's so important that we start now, because I think we've reached the boiling point.
Right.
And unlike a mild, isolated, protest here or there, this right now, the moment, it still has full momentum.
Yeah.
And we got to do something to quell the quelch. I'm not sure which word it is. To tamp it down, and that's action. And we got to do it before this happens again.
Right.
Because it happens all the time.
Right.
It's just that it isn't always recorded.
Yeah.
And to that end, and this is important to me, is that I'm in no way anti-police. I love the police. I love Matt and what he's doing, and we have a friend who's a retired cop, and he's an awesome person, has done some fabulous things.
Yeah.
And so I know that this isn't everybody.
Right.
So do understand that this isn't this is the problem is that racism exists in every level of society.
Mm-hmm.
They at every level, in elementary schools, in high schools, in colleges, and in government, in places of authority. It exists everywhere. And so that it's important that we do something, and at the same time understand that in every instance, the entire body is not corrupt. It's parts of the body.
Right. Well, evidently we have 10 seconds left on Instagram, and it's going to kick us off. So let me just
All right.
go. I love you with all my heart. I am so thankful for our friendship, and I'm with you.